The art of storytelling is continually evolving. The way in which stories are told, along with the importance they hold, have been affected by society's progress almost as much as they've been affected by society. Comics are no exception. Lynn Ward, Art Spiegelman, and Scott McCloud, all artists of their respective times, have individually pushed the boundaries of comics. Ward helped establish what would become the modern comic. Spiegelman helped legitimize comics as a respectable and effective way to tell stories, and McCloud helped with the comprehension and deconstruction of comics. The boundaries of comics were again recently pushed, and in some ways preserved, due to social progress. The rise of the internet in the 90s and its social integration following have had profound effects with not only pictorial storytelling, but storytelling as a whole. While online comics, or webcomics, originally branched from the printed counterparts, as both mediums continue to evolve, their paths diverge slightly. Though the separation makes the culture and storytelling slightly different, these two mediums can still coexist. The first online webcomics took influence from the newspaper comic strips of the late 18th and early 19th centuries. The World Wide Web, when younger, had yet to be ingrained into the surrounding society. The people who knew about and how to use the internet were seen as geeky. Just like the early perception of printed comics, webcomics were far from respected, and for the most part unknown. The Bronze Age of webcomics, stretching from 1993 till 1995, hold most of these early webcomics. This being a fundamental period, there was not much room for exploration on how an online platform could help transform comics. Early webcomics like Netboy and Dr. Fun, both independently starting in 1993, are very simplistic in style and story. Much like the serial webcomics from newspapers, these comics were self-contained stories, with each panel having its own arc. Since then, webcomics have come a long way. As both printed and digital comics have grown in popularity, their perception and audience have been normalized. Likely because of the tangibility of printed comics, their evolution has made way for various organizations like the Comic Code Authority. These organizations sought to regulate and maintain the distribution of comics. However, webcomics, which by nature inhabit virtual space, developed independently from these regulations. These regulations, along with the elaborate process of publishing, are the primary factors that separate these two mediums. When it comes to publishing comics, whether it's through a company or the self-publishing process, creators need to be conscious of editorials, printing cost, marketing, and distribution. In an article in 2011 about how to self-publish, CNN's Kristen Shager wrote, Diamond Comic Distributors
requires that retailers offer at least $2,500 worth of your comic book.
He continued,
This basically means that you have to sell that many books right out of the gate.
This alone is enough to overwhelm many creators. Even if published, there's no guarantee for success. For many, the financial dedication it takes to get a book into stores often isn't worth it. This is why there are only a few mainstream well-known graphic novels. The people who produce them have to be not only extremely dedicated, but lucky as well. There's a division in the comic community among readers and creators. Interactions between these two groups are usually limited to the purchasing of a comic, but even then, there is no direct interaction. Webcomics, like much of the internet, are able to facilitate communities with more communication between sides. With websites like Tapas and Hive or Comics, readers' interactions become as easy as typing a comment. It's also because of these platforms that the process of producing comics has been simplified. All printed comics must go through printing, publishing, and selling to be read. All that's needed to produce a webcomic is a story and a Wi-Fi connection. Homestuck, a popular webcomic, is a perfect example of how interactions between creators and readers can help elevate a story. The creator of Homestuck, Andrew Hussey, started the comic in 2009 and solely himself using Microsoft Paint. But by interacting with his readers through online forums, they collectively named characters, created plot lines, and even added in completely new characters. In addition to being aware of his audience, Hussey is also aware of his medium. By comparing Homestuck to its digital predecessors, there is a clear distinction between creators putting a story into a digital format and using a digital format to create a story. While Homestuck is first and foremost a webcomic, in addition to its traditional panels, Hussey uses a combination of GIFs, flash animations, music, and the occasional interactive games to tell a story. The way Hussey displays his information helps to elevate his comic in a way that is only possible digitally. Another way that the internet has changed how comics are made is the simplicity of updating. Due to the cost of publishing, most graphic novels and comics are only released once they're completed. Webcomics don't have this restriction. Most webcomics release their content page by page, typically done in weekly installments. This gives avid readers time to comment any predictions or compliments for individual panels. This also gives the artist enough time to work on the next panel between posts. This further illustrates the type of mutualistic communities that have come to surround webcomics. Nimona, a comic originally published online in 2012, was a webcomic by Noelle Stevenson. She started the comic in her junior year as an assignment for her class. Since she was a college student, webcomics, being both free and providing a supportive community, served as a perfect platform for her story.
Because it's based on sharing, if you create an image, it's very easy for others to click that image, reblog it, and it goes to their own blog, and everyone who follows them is able to see it and reblog it if they choose.
However, as both her and her comics grew in age and popularity, the format of webcomics no longer gave Stevenson what she wanted. Though the path of webcomics and printed comics have continued to grow in separate directions, these two mediums can still work together. In 2015, Stevenson, after concluding her webcomic online, published Nimona as a graphic novel and took it down from her website. She was able to use the benefits of a digital format in the creation of her story, and then use the benefits of a printed comic in the publication of her story. Both of these mediums still have value in our society today. As artists continue to adapt their art to fit the continual reshaping of society, new ways to tell stories will be discovered. However old or new, virtual or real, a story is a story, no matter how you tell it.